I turned down my wife's best friend when she confessed her love, but my wife left me because she believed her. My name's Logan. I always thought that being faithful meant being safe, that if you were honest and loyal, the people you loved would stand by you, but I was wrong. Rachel, my wife's best friend, told me she had feelings for me. I was stunned, uncomfortable, and clear. I told her I loved my wife, that nothing would ever happen. I walked away thinking it was over. A few days later, my world collapsed. Emily confronted me with a video. Rachel had set me up, filmed a twisted version of events that made me look guilty, and Emily believed her. She didn't want to hear my side, she just told me to get out. I was left speechless, thrown out of my own home, blamed for a betrayal I never committed. All because I said no to the wrong woman. Before everything went to hell, we were the perfect team. I met Emily during our sophomore year in college. She was studying biology, aiming to become a pediatrician. I was majoring in computer science and working 2 part-time jobs to pay for tuition. She was the kind of person who lit up a room without trying, kind, thoughtful, and always a little too stubborn for her own good. I fell fast, and when she smiled at me like I was the only person in the world, I knew I'd do anything for her. We didn't have money, we didn't have time, but we had each other, and that was enough. After graduation, Emily got into med school across the state. We talked for hours about how we'd make it work. I offered to delay my career, move with her, and support us while she studied. I landed a tech support job at a local firm, nothing glamorous, but steady. Every morning, I'd pack her lunch before she left for class. Every night, I'd rub her back while she studied late into the night. I believed in her dreams like they were my own. Those are some of the best years of my life. Rachel came into the picture around that time. She was Emily's roommate in med school. Funny, outgoing, the life of every party. At first, I liked her. She was protective of Emily, always checking in to make sure I was treating her right. We all hung out, sometimes the 3 of us, sometimes with classmates. I never thought twice about Rachel. She was just Emily's loud best friend. When Emily graduated and began her residency, we moved into a small apartment near the hospital. Money was still tight, but things were looking up. I got promoted, she started earning. We got married in the spring, small ceremony, just family and close friends. Rachel was her maid of honor. I still remember Emily's vows. She said I was her safe place, her steady hand in the chaos. She said she'd never met anyone more patient, more selfless. I cried, I believed every word. We bought a modest house a year later. That's when things slowly began to shift. Emily was working long hours, and Rachel had recently broken up with someone. She started coming over more, sometimes uninvited, sometimes staying late. She always brushed it off. I just needed company, or I miss hanging out like old times. I didn't think too much of it, but I did notice how she'd sit a little too close, linger in the kitchen even after Emily went to bed, ask questions that felt too personal. I told myself she was just lonely. I ignored the uneasy feeling. Emily didn't notice, or maybe she didn't want to. She was exhausted all the time, and I didn't want to add more to her plate, so I kept showing up. Cooking, cleaning, supporting, loving her like I always had. Even when the cracks began to show, she forgot our anniversary one year, brushed off our date night because of work, started texting during dinner, always with Rachel. I told myself it was just stress, that things would settle, that she still loved me, just didn't know how to show it anymore. I was wrong. There were nights we'd sit on our tiny balcony with cheap wine, dreaming about the future, kids, vacations we couldn't afford yet, building a life full of purpose. We had plans. We had trust. Sometimes I think about those nights and wonder if they meant more to me than to her. Maybe I was too focused on building a foundation to notice the cracks in her walls. Maybe love had blinded me to how much she was starting to change. When we found out she was pregnant with our first child, we cried, not out of fear, but joy. Everything felt worth it then. I worked overtime to save for the nursery, hand-painted the walls myself. I still remember the look on Emily's face when she held our son for the first time. It was the same look she once gave me, like the world had finally made sense. Rachel was there too, always there. She helped babysit when Emily went back to work. She brought over meals offered to lighten the load. At the time, I thought she was just being kind. I didn't see it for what it really was, a long game. Looking back now, the signs were there. But back then, all I saw was a woman I loved, a family I was proud of, and a life I thought was unbreakable. I never imagined that the person I helped the most would be the one to tear it all apart. The first signs were easy to ignore, because love makes you blind to the little things. It started with the silence. Emily used to call me on her breaks, even just to say hi. But gradually the calls stopped. Then came the late shifts that stretched longer than they used to. Emergency cases, she'd say, or paperwork ran late. I believed her. I wanted to. At home, she was distracted, distant. I'd ask how her day was and get one-word answers. Her eyes were always on her phone. When I leaned in for a kiss, sometimes she'd turn her cheek. I told myself she was tired, that residency was eating her alive. But something inside me knew it was more. Rachel, meanwhile, was everywhere. She started dropping by unannounced, usually with some excuse. I brought wine or thought I'd help with dinner. I didn't mind at first, but then she started acting like the house was hers, too. Rearranging things in the kitchen, giving her opinion on how we should raise our son. Once, I found her folding our laundry, my clothes. It felt off, intrusive. Emily didn't see it that way. She's just helping, she'd say. You're overthinking. Maybe I was. Or maybe I was starting to feel like a guest in my own home. The intimacy between Emily and me changed too. We went from cuddling every night to sleeping back to back, from whispering late into the night to barely saying good morning. I tried to reconnect, planned a surprise dinner, got a babysitter, lit candles like we used to. But halfway through the meal, she was already checking her phone. I promised Rachel I'd help her move this weekend, she said, mid-bite. I couldn't even finish my wine. I began to notice how often Rachel's name came up in conversation, how often Emily defended her, sometimes even before I said anything. It was like there was an invisible wall between us now, and Rachel was on the other side of it, pulling Emily further away every day. Then came the gaslighting. When I brought up how uncomfortable Rachel made me feel, Emily flipped it on me. Are you jealous? She asked. She's my best friend. She's done more for us than you realize. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd given up years of my life to support Emily, sacrificed my career, my time, my health, just to keep our family strong, but somehow I was the selfish one, the insecure one. I stopped talking after that. What was the point? She'd already made up her mind. Then came the accidental moments. Rachel brushing her hand against mine too long, leaning in too close when Emily wasn't looking. Once she called me babe and laughed like it was a joke, but the way she looked at me afterward, it wasn't funny. The worst part? I didn't say anything. I was afraid. Afraid Emily would think I was making things up. Afraid she'd get angry. Afraid that if I pushed too hard, I'd lose her completely. So I said nothing. One night, I came home late from a work event. The house was dark, quiet. I walked into the kitchen and saw Rachel sitting at the table with a glass of wine, alone. She smiled in a way that made my stomach twist. Emily's on call, she said. Want to join me? I declined, mumbled something about needing sleep, and went straight to bed. But the next morning, Emily was cold again, distant, like I'd done something wrong. I wondered if Rachel had said something, twisted another story while I wasn't looking. That's when I realized the pattern. Every time I tried to create distance from Rachel, Emily grew colder. Every time I resisted Rachel's presence, my wife defended her harder. It felt like I was being squeezed from both sides, punished for not playing along in a game I never agreed to, a game I was losing even though I never broke the rules. Love doesn't disappear overnight. It's chipped away, one silence, one dismissal, one accusation at a time. By the time Emily looked at me like a stranger. I could barely recognize myself either. The day it happened, I remember waking up with this weight in my chest. Like my body knew before my mind did. Emily was already gone for her shift, and our son was with her mom for the weekend. The house was quiet, but not peaceful, eerie, tense. I tried to shake it off, made coffee, opened my laptop to catch up on work. That's when I saw Rachel's message. Can we talk, just us, please? It's important. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to ignore it, but part of me hoped, naively, that maybe she wanted to apologize, to back off, to stop making things worse. So I agreed to meet at a nearby cafe, a place with lots of people, open spaces. I wanted to feel safe. When I arrived, Rachel was already there. She looked different, subdued, almost nervous. She fidgeted with her cup, eyes avoiding mine. Thanks for coming, she said quietly. I know things have been weird. Weird isn't the word, I replied. She laughed bitterly, then leaned in. I need closure. I need to know if you ever felt anything. Anything at all. My stomach dropped. Rachel, no. We've been through this. I love my wife. That's never changed. She nodded slowly, her eyes glassy. Right, of course, I just needed to hear it again. I thought that was the end of it. But then she stood up, walked around the table, and pretended to stumble, falling right into me. Her hands grabbed my shoulders, her face close to mine. It happened so fast I didn't have time to react. Before she whispered, "You should have said yes." I pushed her back gently, confused and furious. What the hell are you doing? People were staring. I felt eyes on us, whispers starting. Rachel adjusted her coat and walked away without another word. I sat there, stunned, heart pounding. Something was wrong. Very wrong. That night, Emily came home early. Her face was pale, her jaw clenched. We need to talk, she said. I nodded, relieved. Yeah, we do. Rachel. She cut me off, pulled out her phone, and pressed play. It was a video of me at the cafe, of Rachel falling into my lap, my hands on her shoulders, her face closed. From the angle, it looked like I was kissing her, like I was holding her there. I felt my breath leave me. This is what you've been doing behind my back? Emily's voice cracked. Wait. No, that's not what happened, I said quickly. She set me up. She told me she needed closure. She tripped. On purpose, you have to believe me. I don't, she whispered. 3 words, that's all it took. I trusted you, Logan. I defended you. But this is humiliating. She planned it, I insisted. She's been coming on to me for months. I kept saying, no, you never listened. Emily stepped back, arms crossed. You should leave. I looked at her, really looked, and realized I'd already lost her. Whether or not she fully believed the video, the seed of doubt had done its job. Rachel had won. I packed a bag in silence. She didn't follow me upstairs, didn't say goodbye, didn't ask where I'd go. I slept in my car that night. The next few days blurred, texting her, begging her to hear me out, to talk in person, to at least let me see our son. She blocked me. I reached out to mutual friends, but no one wanted to get involved. Some even hinted that maybe Rachel had warned them about me, that maybe I'd been acting strange. She hadn't just poisoned my marriage, she'd rewritten the whole story of who I was. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. Just replayed that moment over and over. The fall, the whisper, the camera I hadn't seen. How long had she planned it? Did she always intend to destroy me? Or had my rejection pushed her over some invisible edge? It didn't matter now. I was alone, homeless, heartbroken, and worst of all, powerless. There's a special kind of pain that comes from being falsely accused. It's not just the betrayal, it's the knowledge that someone looked you in the eyes, listened to your truth, and chose a lie instead. That's what broke me. Not Rachel, not even the video. Emily's voice, her eyes. The moment she said, "I don't believe you," that's what I couldn't recover from. I moved into a friend's basement for a while. Jake, a guy I hadn't seen in years, but who didn't ask questions. I slept on a lumpy couch and stared at the ceiling most nights, wondering how I went from building a home to being someone's charity case. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was Emily. I hoped she'd say she was sorry that she realized the truth, but the silence stretched day after day. What hurt more was knowing Rachel was probably still around her, still whispering poison, still twisting the knife. I thought about going public, posting my side of the story, texting everyone we knew, but what good would that do? There was no proof, just my word against a video that looked damning, and worse, against a woman who knew exactly how to play victim. I didn't just lose my wife, I lost my son, my home, my reputation, and I did nothing to deserve it. That was the day something in me broke. But it was also the day I stopped waiting for someone else to save me. Because if no one believed me, then I'd have to find a way to prove it myself. So I started writing everything down: dates, conversations, Rachel's behavior, the moments Emily pulled away. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I needed a record. I needed something that reminded me I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined it all. Because if I was ever going to get my life back, I had to start somewhere. Losing everything doesn't happen all at once, it happens in layers. The first layer was the silence. No calls, no messages, no contact from Emily, not even to check if I was okay. That hurt more than the video, more than the accusations. We had built a life together. I had been her anchor, and now it was like I'd never existed. The second layer was the loneliness. Jake let me crash on his couch, and I'm forever grateful, but he had his own life, his own family. I didn't belong. I became a shadow. I woke up late just to avoid people. I barely ate. Days blurred into nights and back into days again. I kept scrolling through old photos on my phone, family vacations, our wedding, the first time Emily held our son. I tried to find signs, clues that it was all fake. But the smiles were real. The laughter in those videos wasn't staged. So what happened? How did we go from forever to forgotten? One night, I found myself parked outside our house. The lights were on in the living room. I could see Emily inside, sitting on the couch, our son asleep on her lap. Rachel sat next to her, laughing at something on TV. That image burned into me. The woman who tore my life apart was still in it, comfortably, easily. While I watched from the outside like a ghost, I drove away with my fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. I'd go back after that. I started drinking, not heavily at first, just enough to numb the sharp edges. But it didn't take much before one drink turned into 3, and then 5. I'd lie to Jake, say I was going out for air, but really I'd sit in the car with a bottle, letting the burn remind me I was still alive. I hit my lowest point the night I nearly called Emily from a bridge. I'd been driving aimlessly, no destination, just running for myself. I parked near a river and stood there, looking down at the dark water. I imagined slipping under. No more pain, no more memories, just silence. But then my phone buzzed. It was a spam email, some random ad, but the light of the screen pulled me back just enough. I started crying, loud, ugly sobs I hadn't let myself feel in weeks, and somehow I made it back to the car, back to Jake's, back to another night. The next morning, I told Jake everything. He didn't say much, just nodded and sat beside me in silence. Then he handed me a notebook. "Write it down," he said. "All of it, get it out of your head." So I did. Every morning I woke up and wrote. Sometimes nonsense, sometimes rage, sometimes letters I'd never send. I wrote about Rachel, about Emily, about the betrayal, the confusion, the heartbreak. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes stung. And slowly something shifted. I stopped waking up dreading the day. I started eating again, showering, reading, walking. I took small jobs online, freelance tech gigs that helped me afford food without leaning on Jake forever. I still missed Emily, I still loved her, but the pain wasn't as sharp anymore. It dulled into something bearable, something I could carry without collapsing. And in that quiet space, I started asking myself, what now? Because maybe I couldn't fix the past. Maybe I'd never clear my name, but I wasn't dead. I wasn't done. Not yet. I began revisiting old habits that once made me feel whole. I played the guitar again, just simple melodies in the quiet of Jake's basement. I reread favorite books from college, searching for pieces of myself in the margins I'd scribbled years ago. They reminded me that I had existed long before this pain, and I could exist after it too. One afternoon, I saw a father walking his son in the park across the street. The little boy laughed, just like mine used to. I stood at the window and cried, not because I was weak, but because I still had something left in me to feel. It was in those fragile moments, softer than rock bottom, but more honest, that I realized I hadn't given up. Maybe I wasn't ready to fight back yet, but I was ready to survive. And sometimes surviving is the most radical form of hope there is. Healing isn't dramatic, it's not loud or cinematic, it's slow, awkward, and mostly invisible. It began with structure. Jake helped me make a schedule. Wake up, write for an hour, go for a walk, apply for gigs, cook something, read. I resisted at first. I wanted to wallow, but I followed the list, and soon it became habit. I started freelancing again. At first, it was just minor tech work, debugging code, updating websites, helping local businesses digitize their systems. But as I rebuilt my portfolio, bigger clients followed. Within a few months, I had steady income and my own small client base. I moved out of Jake's basement and into a studio apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I kept writing. What began as therapy turned into something more. I started shaping my journal entries into a blog, anonymous at first. I wrote about betrayal, about false accusations, about being broken and putting the pieces back together. To my surprise, people read it. They commented. They related. Turns out, pain is universal, and so is the need for hope. A woman named Clara reached out through the blog. She ran a local tech mentorship nonprofit and invited me to speak about rebuilding after personal crisis. I almost said no. Public speaking had never been my thing, but something in me said, try, just once. So I did. Standing in front of that room, sharing my story, I didn't expect the applause. I didn't expect the tears from others who had been through their own private hells. And I certainly didn't expect the feeling that washed over me, like I belonged somewhere again. That moment changed everything. I started volunteering with Clara's group, mentoring teens, teaching them how to code, how to build apps, how to believe they were capable. It wasn't about forgetting what I'd lost. It was about finding something new to build. I also started taking better care of myself. I cut back on drinking. I joined a gym. I even started seeing a therapist, not just to deal with Emily and Rachel, but to understand myself better, the guilt I carried, the wounds I hadn't let heal from childhood, the way I had equated sacrifice with love. It wasn't easy. Some days I backslid, but I got back up. One evening, I received an unexpected email. It was from an old college professor who had read my blog and wanted to feature my story in a mental health publication. He said my words had helped one of his students who was on the verge of giving up. That night, for the first time in months, I smiled without pain behind it. I didn't check Emily's social media anymore. I didn't wait for her calls. The ache was still there, but it wasn't an open wound. It was a scar, a reminder of what I'd survived. I began saving up not just money, but pieces of myself. Little wins, a student's thank you note, a clean day, a successful client project. They stacked up quietly until one morning I looked in the mirror and didn't see the man Rachel tried to destroy. I saw someone better, someone resilient, someone whole. I didn't know what would come next. I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. I wasn't even chasing closure. I was chasing peace. And finally, I was getting close. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I saw a boy chasing bubbles, laughing so loudly it echoed. His father trailed behind, clapping and cheering. For a brief second, a pang of loss hit me, thinking of my own son. But then I caught myself smiling, not from pain, but from gratitude. I was still here, still healing. I didn't know if I'd ever get to be in his life again, but I knew one thing. If that chance ever came, I wanted to be ready. Not broken, not bitter, just better. That thought gave me purpose. I enrolled in a leadership course online, began planning a small tech startup idea focused on youth digital literacy. I wasn't chasing success anymore. I was building something with meaning. And somewhere along the way, I stopped counting the days since Emily left. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for her to come back. I was finally walking forward without looking back. It happened on a Tuesday. Random, ordinary. I was working from a cafe downtown when I saw a name pop up on my screen. Laura. The name didn't click at first, but then I remembered. Laura was one of Rachel's old friends from med school. I hadn't heard that name in years. Her message was short. We need to talk. It's about Rachel. And Emily. My chest tightened. I didn't reply right away. I stared at the screen, wondering if I really wanted to reopen that chapter. But curiosity won. We met later that evening at the same cafe where everything had fallen apart. Laura looked nervous. She had that same cautious kindness I remembered from years ago, when we all used to hang out as couples at med school mixers. She didn't waste time. I didn't know what she did to you, she said, but I do now, and I think you deserve to know. I didn't speak, just nodded. She pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, and handed it to me. It was a voice memo. Rachel's voice filled the tiny speaker. I only did it because he rejected me, she said, laughing bitterly. He thought he was better than me. I warned him. He had his chance. There was more. Her confessing to setting up the cafe incident, bragging about how easily Emily had believed her, how she'd known exactly which angle to film from. She called it my little masterpiece. I sat there, stunned. He recorded it by accident, Laura said. Rachel was drunk, venting. She didn't realize my phone was still on the table. I looked up why now. Because I saw Emily last week, Laura said, and she still doesn't know the truth. She still thinks you cheated. That broke me. I took the phone home and listened to the recording over and over. My hands shook, my heart pounded. But for the first time in so long, I had something I never thought I'd get. Proof. I didn't want revenge, but I wanted truth. So I emailed Emily. Nothing dramatic, just one sentence, you need to hear this. And I attached the audio. She didn't reply that night, but the next day she showed up at my door. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her face was pale, eyes swollen. She stood in the hallway of my apartment, holding her phone like it weighed 100 pounds. I listened, she said. I stepped aside. She walked in. There were no dramatic apologies, no yelling, just silence, heavy, thick, painful. I don't know what to say, she finally whispered. You believed her, I said, without asking me, without even looking me in the eye. She nodded. I did. I waited for anger to rise, but it didn't, just sadness. I'm sorry, Logan, for everything, for not listening, for not trusting you, for choosing the wrong person. It wasn't enough, but it was honest. We sat on the couch for nearly an hour. She told me how Rachel had stayed close, manipulated every interaction, how she'd filled in the blanks Emily didn't question, how ashamed she felt when she realized the truth. I wanted to come sooner, she said, but I was scared. Scared you'd move on, scared you'd hate me. I did, I said quietly, but I don't anymore. She cried. I didn't. She asked if there was a way back for us, for our family. And I told her the truth. I don't know, but I still love you. And I love our son. If we try again, it has to be different. Honest. Real. She nodded. It's all I want. We didn't kiss. There was no romantic music, just a quiet, cautious hope sitting between us. The next day, I published a blog post, not naming names, not outing Rachel, just sharing what it feels like to be vindicated after being vilified. It went viral, thousands of shares, people telling their own stories, thanking me for mine. I didn't do it for applause. I did it because truth, once buried, needs light. Rachel never reached out, but I heard she moved cities, lost a few jobs, mutual friends cut ties. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I didn't need to, because I was finally free. Free from doubt, from shame, from the weight of a lie I never deserved. And for the first time, I was walking back toward the life I wanted, not because I had to, but because I chose to. In the days that followed, people from my past started reaching out, some to apologize for believing the wrong story, others just to reconnect. A few even admitted they had doubted me but didn't know how to help. I didn't hold it against them. Not anymore. Jake threw a small gathering at his place to celebrate the truth finally coming out. We grilled burgers in the backyard, laughed like old times. For the first time in what felt like years, I felt like myself again. Not the accused, not the victim, just Logan. I watched the sunset that evening and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not just because I'd been proven right, but because I had survived it all and still had love left in me to give. Not hate. It's not bitterness. Here's hope. Rachel's fall wasn't public. There was no headline, no viral video, just a quiet unraveling, one person at a time, stepping away once they knew the truth. Laura told me she'd shared the recording with others from med school. Rachel tried to deny it at first, claimed it was manipulated. But the voice was hers. The words were hers. Eventually, she stopped defending herself altogether. Friends stopped returning her calls. Invitations stopped coming. Even her job at a private clinic where her charisma used to open doors faded. I heard she tried to switch cities, start fresh. But stories follow people, especially when they've burned bridges in every direction. I didn't gloat. I didn't even feel satisfaction, just a kind of weary closure. Emily told me she confronted Rachel once after hearing the recording. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just asked one question. Why? Rachel had no answer. She looked small, Emily told me, like the version of her I thought I knew was never real. That stuck with me. People often ask what justice looks like in cases like mine, but justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's just about truth catching up. I saw Rachel one last time by accident. I was picking up coffee near the hospital where Emily worked. Rachel was at the counter, ordering. She turned, saw me, and froze. There was no confrontation, no words. Just like, she knew. And I did too. She left without her drink. Later that week, Emily told me Rachel had resigned from the hospital board. Word had gotten around, quietly but persistently. Her name no longer carried weight, it carried whispers. The same people who once praised her charm now spoke of betrayal, manipulation, cruelty. As for Emily, she changed too. She went back to therapy, started reading again, took time off to focus on our son. Slowly, carefully, she began rebuilding, not just with me, but within herself. One night, she told me something I'll never forget. I wanted to believe you. Deep down, I think I did, but it was easier to believe her than admit I might have been wrong. That honesty broke me and healed me at the same time. We were taking it slow, co-parenting, spending time together but with boundaries. No rushing, no promises, just presence. Rachel's absence left a space that didn't feel like a void, it felt like fresh air. I wasn't the man I was before. Neither was Emily, but maybe that was a good thing. because now we weren't pretending. We were facing each other without illusions. And that felt like the beginning of something real. Some of our old mutual friends reached out to me after everything came out. A few apologized for not speaking up. Others admitted they had sensed something was off about Rachel, but were too afraid of causing waves. I didn't blame them anymore. I had learned painfully how fear and loyalty can twist people into silence. Even my parents, who had kept a careful distance through the worst of it, opened their arms again. They invited me over for dinner, held my hand longer than usual, told me they were proud of how I carried myself. That meant more than I expected. The world didn't change overnight, but my world did. And as Rachel faded quietly from the lives she once dominated, I began to reclaim pieces of mine. Not out of revenge, but out of grace. He had taken so much, but what I rebuilt, it was mine. Earned, honest, stronger than what she tried to break. Life didn't snap back into place. There was no grand finale, no perfect ending, but maybe that's what made it real. Emily and I didn't remarry right away. We didn't rush into declarations of love or promises of forever. Instead, we started fresh. Small walks, family dinners, a movie night here and there. Our son, too young to understand the full story, simply knew that Dad was back and that Mom smiled more when he was around. Trust, once broken, takes time, but it can regrow slowly, stubbornly, like grass pushing through concrete. We went to couples therapy, talked about our mistakes, named our fears out loud. I told her how alone I felt, how betrayed. She told me how ashamed she was for letting doubt win. And with each truth, the wall between us thinned. Professionally, my blog became a platform, an anonymous space where people shared their own stories of betrayal and healing. I never expected it to grow, but it did. I even started a podcast, inviting guests who had faced their own storms. It wasn't about drama. It was about resilience. And received emails from men and women around the world who had been falsely accused, manipulated, cast aside. They thank me for showing that healing was possible, even without justice, even when apologies come late. One message in particular stood out. It was from a woman whose husband had been accused by a close friend. She believed the friend, left her husband, and only years later realized the truth. She wrote, "Thank you for not turning bitter. It gives me hope I can still be forgiven." Forgiveness, that's what it came down to. Not just forgiving Emily or Rachel or the friends who stayed silent, but forgiving myself for not seeing it sooner, for losing control, for breaking down, because survival wasn't enough. Wanted to live fully, honestly. One afternoon, Emily and I sat at the park while our son played on the swings. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. She reached for my hand. "I never thought we'd get here," she said softly. "Neither did I replied, "but I'm glad we did." We watched our son for a while, his laughter filling the air. And in that moment, I realized the lesson wasn't about betrayal. It was about choice. You can let what breaks you define you, or you can choose to build something new from the pieces. We chose to rebuild. And though our story started in pain, it was ending in peace. Maybe that's all anyone can ask for. A few months later, Emily suggested we take a family trip, just the three of us. We drove to the coast, stayed in a small beach house, and spent the weekend doing nothing but being together. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't a celebration, but it was healing. On the last night, as we watched the stars from the porch, she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for coming back." That night, I realized something important. Happiness doesn't come from avoiding pain, it comes from growing through it. From choosing again and again to believe in love even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So if you've been broken, doubted, cast aside, hear this. Your story isn't over. There's still time to turn the page. Because even after the storm, there's light, and it's worth walking toward.